Eyes on Longmont, offering a diversity of topics about our community that will inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy this edition of Eyes on Longmont.
Welcome to the Decker home. I'm Marilyn Decker and I'm a watercolor artist. I'd love to have you come in and look at my paintings and see my studio. Let's go inside. Hello everyone. My name is Marilyn and I'd like to welcome you to my little art studio. This is where I do all my watercolor paintings, and so I'd kind of like to tell you about how I got started in watercolors and why I paint and why I just love this topic. So to start with, I've been interested in art since I was probably in high school. A couple of my girlfriends were really good at drawing, and just like the normal teenagers, I wanted to be just like them. I was in an art class with my friends, my peers, and we had all done a certain drawing, and then the art teacher, I'll call him Mr. W, he held up our work and in a very stern voice and I guess he was trying to be professional, I don't know. But anyway, he did critique all of our work, and it was very difficult on me. He didn't like anything I had done, and it just really kind of crushed my little beginnings of interest in my own artwork. And so I really just set it aside because I thought, well, Mr. W, he must be right. I really don't have any talent. And so in those days, careers, that was in the 50s, and careers for women were pretty limited. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, or you could be a secretary. And that was, I mean, there were a few exceptions, but that was pretty much it. And so I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a teacher, and I thought, well, maybe a nurse. And halfway through my Latin course, I realized I was failing it, and so I asked to be switched to business. And so I found out I was really a whiz at typing and shorthand, and so I thought, okay, that's what I'm supposed to be. And so went on to business school and excelled there and went to work for IBM. So all this time, my interest in art was just still squashed. My dad bought me a set of oil paints shortly after I started at IBM, I think it was, and really showed an interest in helping me to kind of nourish the art that I had let go for a while. Decided to take a night class that was doing art lessons in oils, and I liked it pretty well, and did that for a little bit, and then I heard about a workshop on watercolors. So I signed up for that, and I just suddenly felt a real freedom in painting. And even though watercolor is really hard, because, well, one of my teachers said it's like riding a wild horse, and it really is. And then here we are in Colorado, where the paint's dry at the speed of light, and so it's really a challenge, but I kind of like that challenge. So that's kind of how I got started at the very beginning. So I'd like to show you one of my early watercolors, and this was painted from just a pad of paper that was called rough paper, and the technique I used on this was dry brush in certain areas. So I wanted to show you this rooftop was done with a dry brush technique, where I just had a little bit of paint on the sable brush, and I started from the top of the roof and just dragged it down with, and so it caught on the rough places of the paper, and it just looks kind of like shingles, and I didn't paint every single little thing, I just dragged it over it. And another area where I used dry brush was on the bark of this tree. And I didn't paint every single little thing. I just had the dry brush technique and dragged it over, and it caught on the rough upper edges of the paper. Okay. So, this is another painting that I did using that same rough paper. And what I'd like to show you here is also considered dry brush, and this white that's left is the white of the paper, and that shows the sun glistening on the water. And then the wave is plain white paper as well. So I don't remember exactly how, but I heard about a watercolor artist in Binghamton, New York, who was giving classes, and his name was Paul Elliott. And I studied with him for quite a few years, and I just really loved his work and loved the way he taught. And usually what he did was he would paint a portion of a picture, and then we would paint, and there were maybe 6 or 8 in the class. And then he'd go back to the next section of the painting, and then we would paint, and so on until we all finished. And of course, ours was never as good as his, but you know, we all tried, and we learned a lot because he told us the name of every paint that he used and how he was tilting the brush or how he was holding it. And so the teaching method I thought was great, at least for me. And so I'd like to show you a couple paintings from the beginning with Paul Elliott. This was one of our assignments. He said, I want you to go home and grab a couple potatoes, and I want you to paint exactly what you see. He was trying to train our eye to capture whatever we saw. And so this is what I saw from the potatoes in my bag in the pantry. And so I took it into class, and he said, are you sure? He said, remind me to never eat at your house, because I would get poisoned from these green areas of the potato. And I said, Paul, that's exactly what I saw. And so he says, okay, don't eat those when you get home. So, but it was a good lesson anyway. This is another painting having to do with food. And one day I came home from the grocery store and I just made an arrangement with the fruits and vegetables that I had bought that day. And I really love the color of the eggplant. I like to call it aubergine because I like to say that word. But anyway, I painted that beautiful color, and then I just took a wet brush and sort of brushed down there, and that took away some of the paint, and that gave the shine on the one side of the eggplant. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward as far as trying to capture the actual color of the vegetables that we had and the fruits. So this painting I'd like to show you reminds me a lot of Cape Cod, even though I did not paint it there. On the bayside, where my father had a cottage, there's a tide that goes out very, very far, and so this reminds me of the wet sand along the edge and the pools where we would gather up clams and play with little shrimp and all kinds of things in this shallow water. But the real part of this painting that's important is the lighting. And so the light is coming from this side, and then it's hitting the rocks on this side, and then there's a little bit of light shining here on the sand. So it's a very definite painting plan where the light comes from the left and goes right across the painting. So one of my favorite things to paint are barns, and the more dilapidated, the better. So this one, poor thing, has a silo that has come apart at the top and probably full of snow and everything, but it was a lot of fun to paint. It's just from imagination. It's no particular place that I visited. Another thing to point out is the contouring of the land. So by doing these shadows that go up and at an angle, then you immediately see that it is a bank, and it gives that kind of a definition. And so it's probably a shadow cast from trees that are outside the painting going across, but we don't see them, but somehow we just know that they're there. And the other thing is the softness in the sky. I tried to bring in some soft pastels to balance the starkness of the snow and the shadows. Also, we have some shadows on the rooftop, the kind of saggy roof, and the white of the paper. All the whites are the paper, and then the shading in a neutral gray. So this painting I did with Paul Elliott in his class, and I would say is the most difficult painting that I've ever done. I probably couldn't duplicate it again. I don't know even exactly how I did it, but the ocean water is just extremely difficult to do. And then the spray up into the sky is really tricky. You just have to wet it and drag it upward into the sky and hope for the best is basically what I did. And then the contouring of the waves, this is done with a rigger brush. And, rigger brush holds a lot of paint, but it makes a fine line. So that's all this is done with rigger brush. So I'd like to show you two paintings that are kind of related. The one behind me was the one I did first, and then I'll hold up another one that's similar. So this painting I did in class with Paul Elliott, and it's a lot darker than I normally paint, but that was one of my teacher's things, like, you have to get dark. So that was a real departure for me, but I think it was kind of successful. And so it's a rainy day at the museum. That's the title of it. That's my title anyway. And all the reflections on the wet sidewalk, and putting in people always makes it more interesting. So now I'll show you the other one that's related to it. So this one, it's related to it in the fact that it's quite dark, and yet there's some light streaming out. This is from imagination, but I know this look of the countryside very well. We're from central New York originally, and the hills are just like this. There's lots of barns. I love to paint barns, and this is called Milking Time. So it's the milk house here on one side. This is probably around 5 o'clock at night, when, at least in New York, it gets dark very early, and yet the farmer is still milking, and he hasn't turned off all the lights yet in the big barn. And it's just a cool and warm painting, like the other one. The cool tones on the snow and in the sky, and then the warm tones in the light streaming from the building. So this picture was one done in class with Paul Elliott, and it's a study in shadows and light. And also something that he started to get into with our class was, it's called modifying the colors. So the roof was basically green, and then we introduced a red, which modified the green. And so it's just making it more interesting to vary the color like that. And I got quite fascinated with that, and I've used in a lot of my paintings. Also in this painting, the greenery behind the fence started out with a yellow wash, and then a green on top of it, and then even darker green underneath to show the shadow. And another feature was, again, shadows that are coming from somewhere outside the picture cast across the white fence, and it just makes it a little more exciting to have the contrast between the gray and the white, and then some shadows on the road. And something I threw into this picture that my teacher didn't have, and his was the dog. Everybody seems to love the dog, and it's so typical of dogs. The man's walking straight, the dog's going sideways, sniffing whatever, and so it's just made it kind of natural. So I think that part of it kind of worked. So this is a picture of my grandson at Cape Cod, where we were playing on the sandy beach. And the thing to note here is the reflection of the bucket on his wet leg. And I mean, that it really did look that way. And so it was kind of fun to incorporate that into the painting. And then strong contrast between opposites on the color wheel, the yellow and the blue. So it gives it a little punch. So this is another painting from Cape Cod. You can tell I really love it there. My older daughter had an art school assignment to photograph some figures on the beach at dawn. And so we were all there watching, and she had purchased a couple wedding gowns in a thrift shop and had my younger daughter, this is Betsy, and her girlfriend Jessica. And so my older daughter, Mary Faith, posed the girls on the rocks, and she got them up before dawn, really, and had them get dressed and ready for this soft pink dawn light that we all wanted to capture. So I painted this from a photograph after we returned back home. So it had kind of special meaning because it was our family and we were all doing it together. So this picture was started at the St. Vrain River. My younger daughter Betsy and I were out sketching and painting one day. I sketched there, I know, and I think I laid in the basic underpainting, and then like the washes, like you can see part of it up here, all that is underneath. And then back home, I'm pretty sure I filled in a lot of the darker ones and put more detail in it. And then I was trying to teach my daughter, she wanted to learn how to watercolor, and so I asked her to write down the temperature, the sounds, the feeling that she had being there, and just everything around her, if there were any birds singing or anything like that. And so when I painted this, I thought of all those things, and I think it gives a certain feeling to a painting when you remember where you were and what you heard and how you felt and all of that. So. This is another painting I did with my teacher Paul Elliott in Binghamton, New York. So we call it a foggy day, and this was also a very difficult painting to do because it had a lot of elements to it. I mean, we had the indistinct background, and then we had the sunshine on this side and the shadows on the fence and the details on the house, and then the fall colors. There was so much going on in this painting. Right here on the road, you can see the streaks coming down. Well, that was where we wiped it out with probably a tiny brush, something like this. And while it was wet, we just stroked down there, and it removed some of the paint, and it just gave that kind of wet look to the road. This painting kind of keeps me going because it was difficult to do, and yet I did complete it. So that's something. So exactly 2 years ago, an artist came to Arvada and did a 4-day workshop. And it was very expensive, but it was something that I knew I wanted to do. I looked up his work on the internet, and I really liked the way he painted. He can be precise, but he can also be loose, and I don't know, he's just marvelous. So I went there. I had to drive about an hour each day to get there at the Arvada Art Center. And his name is Sterling Edwards, and he goes all over the country giving workshops. His home is in North Carolina. So 4 days of painting, it just was wonderful. So I went there the first day, and I thought, I don't know anybody, and I'm going to have to really bring my A game to this class. And so the first half, the first day, he demonstrated what he wanted to teach that day. And then the second half, we painted. So the first day, let's see, was a lesson in negative shapes. And so he had done a large tree in a snowy field, and he didn't have any smaller trees next to it. And he had the snow kind of piled up around the base of the tree. And most everybody in the class did exactly what he did. But I decided I wanted to do something different. And so I painted this one, and it's definitely coming in between the trees with color that defines the tree. Makes the tree come forward and the background go back. And then I varied the colors. Here you can see it's lighter and bluer, and this is darker, and this is lighter again. And that makes painting more interesting. And then we had the snow kind of piled up. This again is the white paper, and then grays to contour the snow. So I took it up afterwards to Sterling Edwards, and he loved it. It's just a simple painting, but he really liked it because I kind of went out, branched out, and did the lesson, but I did it my way. So, yay, that was the first day. Well, the second day, I think I overdid it on the first day because I woke up with a terrible migraine. I thought, oh no. And so I went anyway. I drove for an hour, and when I got there, Sterling had this big pot of coffee, and I said, "You're a lifesaver." And so I drank a couple cups of coffee, and the migraine started to go away. So, whew. So I was painting, I don't know, I sort of call it an altered state. Like when a migraine is on the way out, your brain is recovering, and it's, I don't know, I think it is an altered state. But anyway, it's very good for painting. And so it worked out. And so I don't remember what his lesson was in the morning. I think I was still drinking coffee, I don't know. But anyway, in the afternoon, he said, paint whatever you want. And so I had this photo of a scene that we saw in France where a storm was coming in, so that's all this dark cloud, and yet there was still some sun in the foreground, and there were these really cool buildings. So when Sterling looked at the photo, because I was sitting there doing nothing, like I didn't know what to do, and he says, "This is a wonderful photograph. Why don't you do that?" So that's how that came about. And some of the techniques in here are varying the color in the road. So you can see it's kind of a pale gold going into the grays. And then this is spatter painting, where you put a little paint on your brush and you tap it and it spatters all over, just like it sounds. And kind of varying things here and there. I never did frame it. I plan to at some point, but I haven't done it yet. But that turned out okay. So on the third day of the workshop, Sterling Edwards wanted all of us to try our hand at abstract painting. And I had never done this before, and really never had any desire to, but that was the lesson and I was there to learn, so that's what I did. He directed us to some magazines to find the subject of our abstract design, and he gave us a viewfinder that was just a square with a cutout in the middle, and we were to move this all around the page of these magazines and find something interesting that would inspire us to do an abstract painting. So mine was from a National Geographic, and it was kind of a construction site. There were staircases and cranes and all kinds of things going on, and there was some kind of a red sign. I'm not even sure what that was. So that's what I chose. And what I tried to do in this picture was to echo shapes and techniques. So I had the round, and then I had a curve here, and then I had a curve here. I had dry brush here, dry brush here. And actually some of these strokes are dry brush as well. I had blue and blue and blue and blue. And then I had this kind of orangey color that went down here as well, and the pink and the pink. And so it kind of keeps your eye moving all around the painting. And that was my plan, and that's what I did. And so afterwards, I took it up to show the teacher, and he said, "I love this." He said, "You know what? This is Picasso-like." And I go, "What?" I couldn't believe it. And he says, "No, really, I really like this." And so he said, "Now, tomorrow, that's the fourth day of the workshop, we're going to have a show. And each one of you are to choose one painting that you want to put up in front, and we'll talk about each one." And he says, "I want this one up there." So I said, "Okay." And he said, "Now, and I want you to frame it," which I haven't done yet. He says, "I want you to have 10 inches of mat board around each side and put it in a big black frame." And he said, "It's going to be great." So as you can see, I haven't done that yet. Maybe someday. I don't know. It just tickled me anyway. I mean, I did try really hard, but I was kind of surprised at his reaction. I entered this painting in a contest in Binghamton, New York, and it was sponsored by the Fine Arts Society of the Southern Tier. And much to my surprise, it won a blue ribbon. A couple things to tell you about this one is to notice the bricks on the silo. It was done a long time ago on the older silos, and some brickwork or cinder blocks on the milk house. And then within the barn, I varied the color. This is quite warm on this side, and then it moves into the greens and golds on the other side. And this is the darkest dark in the painting, and that's the entrance to the barn. And then on the snow, we had a warm wash of a shadow. It's a warm gray. And the whole painting is kind of warm, so I carried that warm gray onto the snow, and then the farm implement to add a little interest in front of the barn. So this is a scene I'm very, very familiar with because it's a barn that is close to where our cottage is. We drive by it all the time. So it was a painting that I really wanted to do and enjoyed doing. And then I won a blue ribbon. How about that? I ended up giving it to my husband, and it hung in his office at IBM for quite a few years. The Bramble Inn is the subject of this painting. That's B&B in Brewster, Massachusetts. I had a photograph of this and I painted from that. And then my dad carried this painting into this place and they had it on display there for a year. On this painting, it's a study in light and shadows. And you can see that on the buildings and on the road, on the panes of glass, reflecting something from outside, the greens and yellows. And on the trees, I was learning more and more about sculpturing the trees, having generally 3 shades of green, well, a yellow underneath, and then 3 shades of green to give it dimension. And then the light on the trunk. So the rolling hills of Skaneateles, New York, is the subject of this painting. It's an area I'm very familiar with. Skaneateles is one of the Finger Lakes, and the town of Skaneateles is at the end of the lake. Skaneateles is a Native American word. I don't know exactly what it means, but these hills just outside of the little village are very steep and rolling, so I'm really familiar with this area. So we have kind of an icy look here in the foreground, going down into the dip and up where the light hits the snow and it's brighter, and then some little houses and hills and a fence to add some interest. When we moved here from Endicott, New York to Boulder, IBM moved us here, and one of my friends from Endicott had been to Boulder, and she said, "I bet the first thing you'll do when you get there is paint the Flatirons." And I said, "What's a Flatirons?" I had no idea what she was talking about. She said, "Oh, just ask anybody when you get there. Everybody knows what the Flatirons are." So we asked around, and we went for a ride, and sure enough, from the road, looking across the whole Flatirons, it was breathtaking and something I definitely wanted to paint. So we took a photo, and then I came back to our apartment and decided to paint this painting. So it's just a part of our journey, I guess, the life choices that we've made, and the delight we had in being in Boulder. This is the first in a series, a new series that I'm doing on serenity. So I don't know why I got on this subject, but maybe it's the times that we're in now, or maybe it's just something that I actually need right now. But I just want to paint serene scenes, and so this is my first one, and there's really not too much to say about this except that row of clouds that hangs over the water is just so typical of water scenes that I've observed anyway, that I don't know, the clouds just lift a little ways and then they hang there, and This just gives me a lot of peace to look at it, and hopefully it will for you too. So I'd like to do a little demo for you. For today's demo, I did a sketch first. So when I did my sketch on my watercolor paper, I use a ruler to start with. I know that the horizon line has to be straight, and it should not be dead center. So I found the center, and then I dropped it down 1.5 inches and drew in my horizon line. And then I knew that the mountains should not end up dead center either, which is right here. So I extended that over, and everything is like off center, and that's just to make it a little more pleasing to look at. And down on the lower part is a water, a stream, and then land on each side of it. Our big sable brush, and get some water on it. The first step is I wet the areas where the clouds will be with clean water. With a 3/4 inch sable brush, I mix up a sky blue color using blue, cyan, and a tiny bit of violet bluish. I then carry the same blue to the water below for the reflection. Next, I mix a base color of Golden Lake for the mountains. Dry with a hairdryer and work on contouring the mountains with a darker shade. Then I dry with a hairdryer and paint in the golden orange reflection and deepen the blue on the water. I then painted the land areas with a pale mix of brown and yellow. edges of the land are painted dark to show the drop-off from land to water. With a rigger brush, the details of shrubbery and weeds are painted in. It's time to stand back again, take a look, see what needs to be done. That's just part of it. You just really have to. So now that I darkened the orangey part, it makes that color on the water look better. So I'm glad I did that. Well, I think for right now, I think I'm done. I might need to think about it and come back even another day. But right now, I think I'm gonna leave it. And it might be done. We'll see. This painting took 2 hours to complete in real time. The full 2-hour demonstration of this painting will be available on YouTube in its entirety if you want to see more of it. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming, looking at my artwork and talking about painting. I really enjoyed being with you. Have a great day.